Hello everyone and welcome to another Muffin video. Before we dive in here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell and drop a like on the video too if you're enjoying the content. Don't forget to join our Discord server as well if you're not already there. We've also recently activated our channel membership, which comes with all kinds of perks from video shoutouts to personalized help and more, so check that out if you're interested in joining. And as well, a reminder that all comments on every video will be automatically entered into our weekly giveaways. Winners will be randomly selected every Monday, so good luck and let's get started. So, we've arrived at the first class change for the Sword Bearer. And yes, while most of the new skills we get are DPS focused, there are actually some pretty notable upgrades to the tank build as well. So we'll be going over both our new DPS build and a new tank build as well, which is kind of nice. Once again, you have a similar situation to the base class Sword Bearer where you have a DPS and a tank in the same class. And in order to be a really good tank, you need to prioritize a lot of defensive stats, and in order to be a really good DPS, you need to prioritize a lot of DPS stats. So it's really ultimately going to be up to you what your breaking point is, what you're looking for, and how much you want to focus on being an excellent tank, or if you want to really double down and focus on DPS. So one thing I won't be covering in this build is any hybrid builds. The reason is because hybrid builds are very much, dependent on your specific fight that you're wanting to go into, what your current combat power is, what other requirements you might have. So it doesn't make sense for me to give you here's the best hybrid build, because that's going to be up to you to decide based on what you are trying to accomplish. So experiment a bit with that and see, if there's potential, for example, to do a bit more DPS if your party's not having any issues with survivability, and so on and so forth. Now, as a reminder, I personally don't main a Sword Adept, so I've built this information from trusted community sources, and once again I want to especially thank both Demi and Boof for putting together very informative guides, both of which are linked in the description down below. So, with all that said, let's kick things off by taking a look at the new Class Change 1 Sword Adept DPS build. So this is the best in slot skills for DPS, and let's take a look at this, starting as always with the core skill. So the core skill at first glance seems to be super tank oriented. Shield Slam. When you first hear it, you're like, oh, this is a tanking ability, and you would be right in that it is actually quite nice for tanking. But as you can see here, bash the enemy in front, dealing physical damage and entering the shielded state. While in the shielded state, increase your block by 30%, and every 2% block you have increases your natural energy recovery by 1% for 6 seconds. So yes, this is a nice tanking ability, but also this is dealing quite a lot of damage, and you have this added benefit that the more block that you have, the more energy recovery you get. So this build is going to really focus on trying to get our core skills to cast relatively frequently, and you will see a lot of the skills in this build are focused on core skill damage, since it is such a heavy hitting ability. So let's take a look at the tactical skills and see how they support this heavy hitting core skill. So first up we have the Ground Fisher. Ground Fisher deals physical damage to all enemies in front and triggers Earthquake. Earthquake deals a percentage of physical damage per second for 6 seconds. So this is like a damage over time for every second for 6 seconds, and additionally, within 8 seconds after you cast the tactical skill, every core skill cast can trigger the Earthquake ability again. So this is going to be continuously refreshed by casting the core skill within 8 seconds after this ability hits. So this is going to be a nice number one, a big damage going out, and an AoE when you use the tactical skill, and additional damage over time from the Earthquake effect, which can be re-triggered by using your core skill within the 8 seconds after cast. So very nice ability here for damage output, but there is also a synergy with another skill which we'll see as we progress through here. So next up we have Endless Fury. So since you've heard me just say that this build is centered a lot around the core skill, Now we have an ability here that upon casting, gain 50 energy per second for 12 seconds, and increase your skill damage by 15% for the duration as well. So this is a nice increase to our energy recovery, and the more energy recovery we have, the more energy recovery we have, the more often we'll be able to use this core skill. So this is going to help us get our core skill energy, the energy for our core skill up as quickly as possible and use it more often. So that's a very nice ability to help us with energy recovery. Next up we have Shattering Blow. For the next 11 seconds, gain 1 quake stack per second. Each stack adds a certain percentage of physical damage to the next core skill cast, plus if it stacks up to 3 times, then your next core skill damage will increase by 30%. So this is a very nice tactical skill as well. As you can see, everything is basically about supercharging the core skill. Every one of our tactical skills basically exists to make our core skill deal more damage. So that's how this build is going to be working as we progress through it. While you might not always have the ability to get to 3 stacks depending on how fast your core skill is casting, it's still going to be a nice overall increase. So, those are tactical skills, and as you can see, there is a heavy focus on core skill damage. So now let's take a look at the passive skills and see if they follow suit along with the tactical skills to supercharging our core skill damage. So first up we have Forceful Strike. Forceful Strike greatly increases the attack range of Shield Slam, our core attack, but reduces the damage dealt to enemies other than the current target by 45%, and increases physical damage by 30%. Plus, this has an additional promotion level bonus here of increasing the damage Shield Slam does to the target enemy by 25%. So this passive skill basically increases physical damage, and through this promotion here, also increases the damage Shield Slam does to the target enemy in exchange for slightly less damage to non-main targets. So in an AoE situation, you will do slightly less damage, but in a boss situation, this will do a lot of damage. You get extra damage from the physical increase here and as well from the level promotion here. So it's just basically a nice core skill damage increase. And let's go on to the next passive, which is Justice from Above. Now, this is one of the few times you'll see a passive skill that just gives a straight up stat increase. So this increases block by 15%, which yes is also great for tanking, but from a DPS perspective, every 3 successful blocks immediately deals a very large amount of physical damage to enemies in front, so it's an AoE, and this can happen once every 6 seconds. So basically, even in your DPS spec, you're actually going to want to have a fair amount of block, not just so you can trigger Justice from Above once every 6 seconds, but additionally, if you remember on our core skill here, every 2% of block increases your energy regen as well. So that's a nice synergy here. We're getting more block, and we have this added benefit that every 3 blocks within a 6-second period is going to give us this huge outgoing AoE attack here. So that's a nice thing to keep in mind. Next up we have Berserker, which is the same skill we ran in pre-class change Swordbearer, and this is basically increase the damage you take in exchange for increasing all damage you deal by a very large percentage. So this is a nice trade-off to take more damage, but in exchange deal a lot more damage. Now, taking 30% more damage, like I explained in the previous guide, does seem a bit intimidating, but because you are generally more tanky than other DPS anyway, you can survive this additional damage taken without much of a struggle. Next up, we have Unstoppable Force, which is another skill that comes from the pre-class change Swordbearer as well. And this one is every 2 casts of the core skill increase all damage by 25% for 10 seconds. So since this class change 1 build is centered around the core skill, this is going to obviously be active pretty much all the time. So it's just consider it a flat all damage increase because of how often we'll be using the core skill. And then finally we have Tactical Advantage. Every time damage is dealt by your tactical skill, increase your core skill damage by 8% for 4 seconds, up to 8 stacks. So this actually synergizes. Remember I said when I was discussing Groundfisher, I said there's actually a passive skill that synergizes with this, and this is that one. Because we have Groundfisher here, which deals this earthquake effect, is this Earthquake deals damage once a second, every second for 6 seconds, and can be re-triggered by your core skill. So you're gonna have a ticking damage once a second, every second for the duration of the battle, which means this is going to be max stacks all the time, pretty much. So 8 times 8, up to 8 stacks. Look at this, up to 8 stacks. So that's going to be 64% core skill damage plus an additional 21%. This is like almost 85% increase in your core skill damage. It is absolutely massive. So this is a very important passive skill that's going to supercharge your core skill damage even more than it's already being supercharged. So that's pretty wild. Now we can talk about the talents for our DPS build. So we will be running the Shield Slam talent disc, which is the class change 1 talent disc. Plus you will be running Hasten cooldown, which reduces the cooldown of all your tactical skills. And to be honest, if you're lacking a little bit in crit rate, you could run Zealous Burden, but if you do have plenty of stats, let's say that you're pushing the game as a spender or a whale or something, and you have quite a lot of stats, then it may be beneficial for you to swap Zealous Burden to Voice of Bloodlust to get more crit damage instead of more crit rate. So that would probably be more optimal if you have access to more stats. Otherwise, Zealous Burden is a good one to run. Now, when it comes to Shield Slam in your DPS spec, it's quite simple. You will be running full left side. So let's take a look now and understand what exactly these talents will be giving us relative to our DPS output. So first we have Ground Fissure Impact. When casting Ground Fissure for the first time at the start of battle, gather all enemies to the surrounding area and increase physical damage by 20% for 10 seconds. So this is nice at the start of the battle. Like if you're in an AoE situation, it's just going to gather all the enemies up to you and then deal a lot more damage to the 20% physical damage increase. So just a nice little bonus at the start of every battle. Next up we have Offensive Posture. 30 seconds after the start of the battle, increase all physical damage by 10% until the end of battle. I don't need to explain that. Straight up damage increase. Great. Next. Next we have Leyline Interruption. Each hit of damage dealt by the Earthquake from Ground Fissure restores 15 energy. So this is actually a really nice synergy with the rest of our build, which as we know is increasing our natural energy recovery and energy sources in order to cast our core skill more often as it deals significant damage. And here we have yet another source of energy. So every time that Earthquake ticks, which ticks once per second, you're going to get an additional 15 energy for that, which is another nice source of energy. And then finally, we're going to have Justice Arrives. So, Justice from Above automatically triggers once every 4 seconds. When triggered, for every 5% block you have, increase the skill damage the target takes from you by 1% for 4 seconds. So this is actually very interesting. If you remember, the passive skill Justice from Above had this basically it's every 3 blocks within a 6-second period triggers the Justice from Above ability, but now we can trigger it regardless of whether we get blocks or not, automatically once every 4 seconds. So, and you can see here, you get this additional skill damage increase. So every 5% block that you have, if you have 50% block, this means you'll be getting 10% additional skill damage. Because it's active for 4 seconds, it means, and triggers every 4 seconds, it means this is pretty much going to be active all the time. So this is a very nice talent for this build and sort of puts the bow on top and wraps it up and brings it all together. So that is the complete DPS build for the Class Change 1 Sword Adept, and now let's take a look at the updated tank build. Now, there are only a few changes in the overall tank build, so if you want to have a more in-depth guide about tanking in general, please check out my Swordbearer guide where I go quite into detail about all the tactical skills and the passive skills which have not changed to this Class Change 1 build. But with that said, let's take a look. So the first change obviously is we are going to be running the new core skill Shield Slam. And unlike the first Swordbearer core skill, which basically offered no additional tanking functionality at all, with Shield Slam, we have this effect here. Whenever you use the core skill, you enter the shielded state, which increases your block by 30%. That is a significant amount of block increase. So this is very nice from a tanking perspective. While we understand how this functions from a DPS perspective, the benefit from a tank perspective is of course the fact that we get this huge additional block percentage whenever we use the core skill. So that's a very nice tanking increase for us. Tactical skills are going to be the same as we ran in Swordbearer, and again, please check that video out if you want to go into detail about what these all do, but it's basically Shield, Warcry, and Banner. They're your bread and butter for almost 99% of tanking situations. When it comes to passive skills, we have 4 of the 5 that are the same. We have the Blade Armor is the same, Fearless Vanguard is the same, Stalwart Blood is the same, and Perseverance is the same. And again, if you want more details on how these all work and synergize with tanking, check out my Swordbearer guide. But the one that does change is we're going to swap Vengeful Shield, which is what we ran in Swordbearer, to Justice from Above. And the reason for that is right here. This is yet another source of flat block. Now this one here is flat, which means this applies even when you're out of combat and gives you 15% more block. So anyway, this is the fully up-to-date tank skill loadout that you will be using in Class Change 1. This is a very nice upgrade to our tanking loadout, especially with the core skill increasing our block, and as well Justice from Above increasing our block. And additionally, as if that wasn't good enough already, we actually finally have some tank beneficial talents. So in the Class Change 1, in the pre-class change Swordbearer, we didn't actually have any beneficial tanking talents in our main class talent disc. But now we have these two here. We have Shielded Charge and Block Stance. So when you're in your tanking build, you're going to take the first 2 of your Shield Slam talent disc here, Shielded Charge and Block Stance, and then you're going to run Unwavering Bulwark and Turning Point. Now you only need to run these 2 here in the main talent disc if you're in your full tank spec, which means all the additional points that you have you can put into Unwavering Bulwark and Turning Point. So Unwavering Bulwark, as you can see, increases your defense and gives some additional other benefits, like in each battle the first time your HP drops below 20%, reduce all damage taken by 30% for 6 seconds. Every 10 seconds again a shield that can absorb 8% of your max HP for 3 seconds. For each enemy on the field, reduce damage taken, etc. There's a lot of great tanking related abilities and Unwavering Bulwark. And of course, Turning Point is an extremely important tanking ability, tanking talent tree, excuse me. This one gives you Unyielding State, which is basically a free death save. Once per battle, when you take fatal damage, you become invincible for 10 seconds and you continue fighting. So very, very nice combo of talents here. Plus, let's take a look at the Shield Slam talents. Shielded Charge. Upon entering battle, immediately restore energy to full and increase the damage to the first Shield Slam by 100%. Great. But more importantly, 30 seconds after the start of battle, increase block by 10% until the end of battle. And this is why we run these 2 talents, because we have yet another source of block, which not only, as we know now, increases our block, which is a great tanking stat to have, but number 2, we have several synergies in our build where you get additional energy regen and other benefits from having that additional block in your loadout. So that is the full tank build. So we fully explained DPS, we fully explained tank, and now we're going to transition and talk about stats. So like I said in my Swordbearer guide, I generally disagree with any stat guides that says try to keep this balance where you can go and do decent DPS and be a decent tank. Try to think to yourself about whether you want to be a really strong DPS or a really strong tank, and then focus more on trying to achieve that target. Now I will say, as you progress further and further into the game, obviously you're going to have access to a lot more different sources of stats, which is going to essentially mean the further you progress, whether you're a whale or a free-to-play player, you're going to be able to balance having high offensive stats with high defense as well, and not having to make that compromise. But since we're still in the relatively early game, it's still somewhat of a consideration. So if you want to go full-on hardcore DPS, you're going to need a certain approach to stats, and if you want to be more tank focused, you're going to have a slightly different approach to stats. So when it comes to DPS, quite similarly to the base Swordbearer class, you're going to run your accuracy around about 100%. You can arguably get up to 103% if you're full focusing the DPS spec, and then you will balance your crit and determination as much as you can. I would say 35, 40, 45%, whatever you can realistically achieve with your available stat pool, as long as your crit and determination are balanced. The next stat for you is actually going to be a combo of block, mastery, and haste. So block is actually pretty important, as we know now, even in the DPS spec for Sword Adept class change 1, you're going to benefit from block beyond its defensive capabilities. So block becomes quite a bit more important than it has been for DPS, basically in the previous class change or in general. So you will be prioritizing block, and as well the other stats like haste and mastery and crit damage and attack, etc. So that's how you should be approaching your stats from a DPS perspective. Now when it comes to your tank build, if you want to go more on a tank focus, then your accuracy should be around 100% or so. You still want to balance your crit and determination, but to a lower investment level than DPS. Even if you have 30 or 35% or whatever, it's still okay. But then, you would get your block as high as you can, roughly between 50% and 60% seems like a good target. And then you would prioritize endurance, which is a great defensive stat. Evasion is another great defensive stat. HP, defense, and tenacity. And these stats become increasingly more valuable as you start to progress further into the game and as content becomes harder and harder. You may not feel the added benefit of getting tankier in the early content of the game, but once you start unlocking some of the later trials and some of the harder group content, you're gonna be very happy that you are super tanky, because some of these bosses deal hardcore damage that'll basically one-shot you. Sometimes even with your shield, you're gonna be almost one-shot by some of their abilities. So that's why I'm saying there's gonna reach a point where you're gonna be very happy that you went full tank, or very happy that you've gone full DPS and don't have to tank. So that's how that works. Next up, let's quickly look over Melomon again. It's going to be the same as our Sword Bearer, which is going to be, for your DPS build, you're going to run main slot Demon Hound, and for your tanking, you're going to run main slot Blade Hound. Demon Hound increases our damage quite significantly, and Blade Hound is one of the only pets that, only Melomon that has a damage reduction as part of their awakening skill. When it comes to your special skills for DPS, you're going to be running your turn plus Echo, and then for the third you have a number of choices. You can run Invisible Friend in, for example, Dragon. You could run Arcane Resonance or Book of Answers. It just depends. You need to test, or even Sharpness of Claw. You need to test based on the current fight that you're in and what your stats are, which one will give you the most DPS output in the third slot. But Echo and your turn are the essential ones that don't change. For tanking, it's going to be pretty much the same as the previous tanking build. You don't have that many really awesome tanking Melomon special skills, so you're going to be pretty much using any combination of like Reappear, which gives you an additional fatal damage dodge, but this doesn't stack with Turning Point, so you'd only use Reappear if you're for some reason not running Turning Point. And then, of course, you can also use Ice Shadow Blessing, which increases your HP, Defense Enhancement, which increases your defense, and the HP Recovery as well here, which are all viable options alongside Cleanse if you need to clear debuffs in a fight. So, with all that said, the last thing I need to mention is mounts, which is what's going to unlock for you in Class Change 1, and you're going to have only Generation 1 mounts, so ignore these orange things you see here. But you're in a good position as a tank in Generation 1 mounts, because you're going to have the same best in slot mount for both your DPS and your tank spec. That's right, you can fully invest into Rock, because that's going to be your best in slot for both DPS and tanking. The reason is because, number one, it increases the damage enemies take from you by a percentage, which is the ultimate way to deal more damage, is by anything that has damage percentage. Plus, you have this reduction of damage that they deal by a percentage as well. So that's also going to reduce the damage you take from them. So that is your best in slot for tanking. And there you have it. That's a complete guide to the Sword Adept. I hope you found this information helpful and you find yourself with more than enough information to take on the class change 1 experience. And yeah, good luck with your tanking, good luck with your DPS, whatever you choose to do. And if you have any questions or feel I didn't cover anything, leave it in the comments down below. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye now.